So let's just jump right in and ask a really, really big question. It's a question that's sitting right underneath pretty much every major headline you read, every trade deal, every conflict. And that question is, how is our world actually organized? Today, we're going to dig into this idea of international order.
Right. So, how is our world organized? I mean, people have been wrestling with this one forever, from thinkers in ancient Greece all the way to diplomats at the United Nations today. But as you're about to see, the answer is, well, it's not nearly as simple as just looking at a map full of countries. It's a much more complex and, honestly, a much more fascinating story.
You know, when we hear the phrase international order, our minds usually go to places like the UN, right? We think of institutions designed to bring about peace and cooperation. But if we look at history, the whole concept of order has also been used for, let's say, less noble goals, like justifying colonial empires or enforcing global hierarchies based on race. So, to really unpack all of this, we're going to turn to a field of study called International Political Sociology, or IPS for short. And this is basically where scholars go to really challenge the easy answers about how the world works. We're going to dive headfirst into three of their biggest, most fundamental debates.
Okay, first up, this debate gets to the very heart of the matter. Is world order something we intentionally design, like an architect with a blueprint? Or is it something that just grows on its own, like an ecosystem?
And this is a great way to visualize those two competing ideas. The blueprint view on the left, that's the idea that order is built on purpose. Think about the creation of the United Nations right after World War II. That was a deliberate attempt to design a system to stop future wars. But then you've got the ecosystem view, which says order just emerges. It's not planned. A great example is the global financial market. It wasn't created by some master plan. It grew organically out of billions of individual transactions and a whole bunch of shared ideas and beliefs. So, this blueprint idea is really tied to thinkers like Hedley Bull. His big thing was seeing international order as this deliberate setup created by states to achieve common goals, security, keeping promises, making trade possible. In this version of the story, states are the architects. They're the ones building the rules and institutions to make the world a little less chaotic. But the ecosystem perspective tells a totally different story. It says, hey, maybe order isn't planned from the top down at all. Maybe it bubbles up from the bottom. Think about the unwritten rules of diplomacy, how diplomats just know how to act, or how an economic idea like neoliberalism can spread across the globe and shape policies everywhere without a central command. All of these things create patterns, they create structure, but there's no single architect in the driver's seat. And that brings us perfectly to our second big debate. If there is some kind of order, who are the main characters making it happen? For a long, long time, the answer was simple: states. But IPS scholars look at that and say, hold on, that's way too simple. So here's where that divide really comes into focus. The traditional state-centric view is all about the relationships between states. War, diplomacy, treaties, all that stuff. But the decentered view says the state is just one player in a much, much bigger game. It argues we should be looking at forces that cut across borders, things like international companies, social movements, or even these powerful global hierarchies of race and class that don't really care about your passport. Now, to be fair, the folks who focus on the state have a pretty strong argument. They can point to real history. First, there's this famous idea from the sociologist Charles Tilly that war made the state. Basically, European rulers had to build up bureaucracies and tax systems just to fund their armies. Then you have decolonization, where movements all over the world cleverly use these international ideas of sovereignty and human rights to demand their own states. And finally, you get these global scripts. It's like a starter kit for being a country. New nations adopted similar ministries, flags, anthems, all the things a proper state was supposed to have. But what if we're all focused on the wrong thing? What if the most powerful organizing force in the world isn't the state at all, but race? This idea, which was inspired by the brilliant W.E.B. Du Bois, suggests that for centuries, a global color line has been the real organizing principle. It argues that this transnational racial hierarchy, which was born out of colonialism, is still one of the main drivers of global inequality today, and it cuts right across all those borders we see on the map. Okay, this brings us to our final debate, and this one is maybe the most mind-bending of all. Are we living in one single, coherent world order? Or is it more like a bunch of different, overlapping ones? Or, and this is the big one, what if there's no real order at all? So there are a couple of main camps here. One side says, yes, there's a single big system, like global capitalism or the liberal international order, and it has one dominant logic that pulls everything together. But the other side says, no, the world is more like a pluriverse. It's a messy mix of many overlapping orders. Think about it. The legal order of the European Union exists right alongside the unofficial order created by big tech companies, and they both exist alongside the very specific rules of, say, international diplomacy. They all coexist, they bump into each other, and sometimes they even clash. But then there's a third, even more radical idea that just comes in and flips the whole table. Thinkers like Cedric Robinson have argued that maybe our obsession with finding order is the real problem. He suggested that by constantly looking for a neat system, we're completely missing what might be the true state of things, the fundamental nature of social disorder. And that leads to a pretty wild thought, right? What if order isn't actually out there in the world? What if it's just a story we tell ourselves, an illusion we create? Because as humans, we just can't stand the idea of pure, unfiltered chaos. From this point of view, maybe disorder isn't a problem we need to solve. Maybe it's just reality.
So, blueprint versus ecosystem, states versus other forces, one order, many, or none. I get it. This is some pretty heady, abstract stuff. You might be wondering, okay, but why does any of this actually matter in the real world?
Well, it matters because the way you choose to see the world, the theory you use, the lens you look through, it literally changes what you see. It changes what you think is important and what you think is even possible. The lens you choose is the difference between seeing global inequality as just an unfortunate accident, or seeing it as the direct legacy of a colonial system built on race. It shapes whether you think power is held only by presidents and prime ministers, or also by big corporations and powerful ideas. It helps you spot the hidden hierarchies all around us. And maybe most importantly, thinking about these things opens up entirely new ways to imagine what a different, more just world could actually look like. And that really is the ultimate question this all leads to. If every so-called order we've ever had has been built on some kind of hierarchy, whether it's nations or races or classes, then the real challenge for all of us is to imagine something completely new. What would a world that's truly organized around justice and not hierarchy even look like?